All right, guys. Welcome to the. I don't know what to call this. We're gonna talk about Edmund Spenser's sonnets, okay? I just got done teaching these in class today. I'm going back and doing these videos afterwards, trying to make sure I cover the same things. I gotta tell you, some of you really absorbed this and did a great job, and I was really proud of you. Some of you seemed to give up before we even began. You heard the word poetry, you heard the word sonnets, and you immediately abandoned ship because it's difficult. And I'm not going to lie and say it's not. But let me tell you something. This kind of stuff is manageable if you just follow a few tricks, some of them being, taking it slow, looking at this in sections, realizing that with sonnets, particularly, these types, these Spenserian or even Shakespearean type, they really use the same format, these two. Sonnets is the last two lines, the couplet, the heroic couplet at the end really can clue you in on so much of it. And just quit saying you can't do stuff. I mean, quit, assuming that because you haven't been able to read poetry since middle school that you still can't do it as a 17, 18-year-old, because you can't. Plus, I'm doing all the heavy lifting for you. So don't give up. Learn the lessons, and hopefully those of you who had bailed out on me in class and gave up pretty quick into it, and guys, honestly, it's a majority of you in fifth period did that, which is not normally you guys. That disappointed me because I know you guys have usually been really good at trying for me, and you just kind of gave up. I realize poetry is not everyone's thing, but I want you to know that it's not as tough as we make it seem, okay? There is an art to poetry. A lot of the stuff in these sonnets, these Spenserian sonnets, are very heavily imagery based, and the wording is difficult. I mean, the stuff was written in the 1500s. So obviously, we've got a different culture and a different, a different country at the time these were written in. But the ideas are timeless. They really are. So, all right, we're going to start on page 254. I got three sonnets for you, sonnets 135 and 75 by Edmund Spenser. These are part of a sonnet sequence called Amoretti. That it was written to his, I don't know I don't know the time period here for this, but either girlfriend at the time or later his wife, Elizabeth Boyle. And they represent all sorts of amazing concepts. Now, the ones today, um, they don't, especially Sonnet 35 in my opinion, doesn't age as well, just because people today would see the actions of Sonnet 35 as perhaps stalkerish or psychotic to a point, when in this time period it was written, it was a much more romantic ideal. Okay, so gosh, what's going on down there? All right, excuse me, having a little bit of chest pain there. Let's hope that's nothing serious. Okay, let's look at Sonnet 1 first of all. And Sonnet 1 is this is the first year I've taught Sonnet 1. Every year before I've ignored it because it is a difficult sonnet. But once I kind of figured out the trick here, I realized there's a lot of value to it. Sonnet 1 was the first in this sequence, and basically the purpose is to tell us why he wrote these. He does something interesting. If you can get this key, and this is the thing with poems, you unlock one part of it, and then all of a sudden the rest of it starts to make sense. But you got to get past that first hurdle. So Sonnet 1 is really giving you um, the purpose of the entire sonnet sequence. And it's doing something weird in that it's personifying the poems themselves. So let's look at this. We're going to do this in stanzas, even though they're not broken into stanzas in your book. We're going to do 4, 4, 4, and then look at the ending instead of reading the whole thing and just leaving you in the dust. So let's do the first 4 lines, first quatrain. Says, happy he leaves when as those lily hands, which hold my life in their dead doing might, shall handle you and hold in love soft bands, like captives trembling at the victor's sight. So the trick here is when we say happy he leaves, leaves here does not mean the two definitions we have. It's not in the verb position here, so it's not obviously not the verb as in I went somewhere. It's also not leaves like what's outside on the trees that fall. He's not saying that happy when these, pale, beautiful hands are holding leaves that fell off the tree. Leaves here is a reference to something we rarely use today, although it's still used. But the leaves of a book are the pages. All right. So he's talking about these pages that these poems are written on. So these pages are going to be happy, which there's your personification, when this woman who he's written this to, Elizabeth Boyle or whoever, when they're holding them and trembling. And that could be either her trembling because she's enjoying the poem so much, or the poems themselves trembling because they're being read. Okay. He says, and happy lines on which with starry light those lamping eyes will deign sometimes to look and read the sorrows of my dying sprite, written with tears in heart's close bleeding brook. So the first stanza was about the leaves. This one's about the lines and how they're going to be happy that she's finally reading them. The fact that he says that she'll deign sometimes to look upon them, again, it gives you a clue of what we call in class, we talk about it being unrequited love, meaning that maybe this girl at the time of the poetry being written, or when he's writing it later, he remembers at some point where he didn't think she was really into him. And he loved her, but he gave her these poems hoping that she would one day read them. Then he says, and happy rhymes bathe in the sacred brook of Helicon, whence she is derived. All right, let me try that again, guys. And happy rhymes bathe in the sacred brook of Helicons, where she derived is. When ye behold that angel's blessed look, my soul's long lacked food, my heaven's bliss. So now we've had the happy leaves, we've had the happy lines, now we have the happy rhymes. And he makes some allusions here. Allusions are common in sonnets, they're common in poetry in general, but you have two main sources of allusions. You've got the Bible, which we have the reference to angels here. It's a stretch, but that's kind of an allusion. And then you also have classical allusions, which are reference Greek and Roman mythology. And that's Helicon, which was a river that was a source of inspiration. It was associated with the muses. So he's calling this woman the reason he writes his muse. He says, leaves, lines, and rhymes, seek her to please alone, whom if ye please, I care for other none. So, and then at the end, he brings our three stanzas, the leaves, the lines, and the rhymes back together, and he says, seek to please her alone. This girl, he wrote all of this for her alone. And the typical interpretation here for most people is to say, when he says, whom if you please, I care for others none, they think he says, I'm caring for her alone. But there's a cool alternative way to read this, where he says, whom if you please, I care for others none. The comma there makes it seem like maybe he's talking to whoever ye is. And remember, that's the poems. So basically what I get from this is he's saying that if she finds joy in this poem, then he cares about it more than anything else he's ever written. And guys, this guy was a prolific writer that had some amazing things associated with him. And he's saying the thing that would matter most to him is the one thing that she smiled at when she read. Okay, so that's Sonnet 1. It lays the groundwork for the entire sonnet sequence for Amoretti, which is 89 sonnets. And it's romantic. I like this one. I think the idea that he's saying, the most important writing I ever did is the writing that made this woman I love smile, I think is beautiful. Now, we go from that to Sonnet 35, which definitely screams a little different version of this, okay? Okay, let's look at the first four. My hungry eyes, though greedy, covetize still to behold the object of their pain. With no contentment can themselves suffice, but having pine and having not complain. So, again, we have a very common, like the unrequited love shows back up here. He's staring at something he's covetizing, meaning he's wishing for something he can't have, and he's wishing for it to an almost sinful degree. Remember, the term covetous comes from a negative connotation. We think about in the Bible, where it's you're not to be covetous of other things, which is it's not just that I want something, it's that it's an obsession and it borders on sinful thought. So he really wants this girl, and he's continuously surrounding himself by looking at her. He says, "Still to behold the object of their pain." So he's constantly seeing her, and is really, really just wishes he could be with her. He says he's content with nothing else in his life except with her. Next ones, he says, for having it, they cannot life sustain, and having it, they gaze on it the more, in their amazement, like Narcissus, vain, whose eyes him starve, so plenty makes me poor. So next allusion here, he's like, I'm like Narcissus, except staring at her. And of course, if you know your references, and your book has it, but Narcissus basically was a guy who loved his own appearance so much, he starved to death and died, and because he was so obsessed with himself. Now, remember, Greek mythology is way over the top, and it's meant to teach lessons. Sorry, guys. He's meant to teach these lessons, and that's what he's trying to show here. He's like, I'm like Narcissus, but I'm so obsessed with this girl, I can't. And he's going to say this in the next few lines. I can't enjoy anything else. He has a paradox here, which I think is a really cool phrase. Where he says, so plenty makes me poor. He's saying the more I look at her, the more poor I feel. And, the paradox here is that you would think the more you have of something, the less poor you would be in that area. But again, you think about the more you spend time with things that you want, that you don't possess, but you're around them, the more envious and covetous you become. So that's what he's indicating here. All right. So now, line 9, and I pointed this out in class, is what we call the volta. It's the turning point. In sonnets, it's almost always line 9. You occasionally might get it in 8 or 10, but it's always in that area, and it's a turning point in the poem. So Petrarchan sonnets that have the typical 8-6 stanzas, the problems in the first 8 lines and then the solutions in the next 6. This isn't one of those. This is that 4-4-4-2, but really you still kind of have the same thing where the 4 stanzas kind of set the stage. And that third stanza is where we see a turn. So when he says yet, the yet is your volta point. It says, yet are mine eyes so filled with the store of that fair sight that nothing else they brook, but lo, the things which they did like before, and can no more endure on them to look. So again, he's pointing out here that he's so obsessed with this girl that the things he once loved, he hates now. And he can't even bear to look on. The only thing he wants is to be with this girl. And then remember, your heroic couplet is your key to unlocking the whole poem. He says, all this world's glory seemeth vain to me, and all their shows but shadows, saving she. Because they're basically saying everything that's great in this world now seems to me to be pointless, and the only thing I care about is this girl. Which, notice, that couplet pretty much sums up what's been said in the rest of the poem. That's why I'm telling you, understanding a couplet is how you get through these poems. So those of you who are like, oh, I can't do poetry, Mr. Morris. Sonnets, it's the last two lines. You can do this. At least at least Spenserian, Shakespearean, those sonnets, that's the key, all right? Okay, Sonnet 75 is a much overused topic, okay? It's a great one. And it deals with the concept of mortality versus immortality. Really, guys, the point of this poem is going to come down to, the only way to be remembered for a long, long time is, either you've done something historically significant so that you remember whether it's good or bad, or it's through someone else's or your own writing. That is what lasts. You got to think, no matter how great, your business was that you owned or anything else, after a certain period of time, people kind of forget you. Most of you remember your parents. All of you, I hope, remember your parents. Most of you probably remember your grandparents. But when we start going past that, your great-grandparents, most of you don't have a clue really who they are. So you see how quickly after a couple generations we're forgotten. So this poem's tackling that. Remember, this is in this poet sequence, this is near the end of it. Sonnet 74, which isn't in the book, where he's actually praising the name of this person that he is in love with. So Sonnet 75 kind of picks up with that. So let's see what's happening. This is the easiest of the three. He says, one day I wrote her name upon the strand. And by the way, strand means beach, okay? So one day I wrote her name upon the strand, but came the waters and washed it away. Again I wrote it with the second hand, but came the tide and made my pains his prey. So the guy's writing his beloved's name in the sand on the beach, and then it's washed away, which is a very, very common image in poetry. In fact, one of Shakespeare's sonnets covers the same idea. So we're getting a very basic imagery. This one's very easy to understand so far. Vain man, said she, that dost in vain essay a mortal thing so to immortalize. For I myself shall like to this decay, and eke my name be wiped out likewise. She's pointing out, and again, in these types of poems, the beloved one, not the poet, the other person, is typically the more practical and less romantic one. So she points out, she's like, man, you're being really vain right now. I mean, you can't immortalize something that's mortal, like my name. She just points out, like, even I'm going to, not just my name, I'm going to die and be forgotten at some point. So quit trying to make something last that just can't. And let's enjoy it for what it is. Look at line 9. There's your volta again. Not so. Not so, quoth I. Let baser things devise to die in dust, but you shall live by fame. My verse your virtues rare shall eternize, and in the heavens write your glorious name. He points out, not so, because here's what's going to happen. My poems are going to survive forever, and that's how I'll let you and our love live on forever. And of course, he's got a good point, because let's see, Spenser he was born in 1552, died in 1599. So 16th century, and here we are in the 21st century, and we're still reading about this girl. I mentioned Elizabeth Boyle's name multiple times in this video. So she's lived on, not 400 something years at this point. So I'd say he's right, wouldn't you? Final two lines. Where when as death shall all the world subdue, our love shall live, and later life renew. He's pointing out that not only will they live forever, this example here is going to inspire future people to begin their own, romantic stories. All right. And that's a beautiful, beautiful thought. And it's a very beautiful poem. Now, here's the thing. Y'all might be looking at this like, Mr. Morris, if you weren't going over this with me, I'd never figure it out. But the fact is that you can. You just have to slow down and think. Take the time to really analyze things. We live in a world where people don't think. They just rush to say things. And that's why so many of you end up in trouble in conversations, is you don't think through your statements. So what I'm doing now is I'm trying to teach you to do that and start unpacking things. Just because something's difficult doesn't mean we don't try it. Like I pointed out in my fifth period class, so many people play video games on the hard setting when you could play it on a much easier setting. Why? Because there's nothing impressive about winning on easy. And guys, at this point, we have to look at this like we're trying to, get the machinery of our brain moving, and so many of you rarely use it for anything that requires this depth. And that's why we struggle in this. That's why we struggle in some of our math courses. That's why some science stuff is difficult for us. It's because we just really haven't forced our brain to work the way it's been intended, the way God designed it. So hopefully some of this will give you some inspiration, and you'll figure out you can do it. By the way, I love poetry. I don't look like a poetry guy. I do. This is what I like spent most of my college on, was poetry. I love it. I think it's got a lot of ways to impact us today. It's in a small, like basic, quick package, most of it, and it's better than reading 300 pages that try to explain the same thing. So anyway, guys, we're right at 15 minutes, a little bit over, and I think this is a good place to stop. Tomorrow, we're going to tackle Sir Philip Sidney, who's usually taught with Spenser, and always has been, apparently. So we're going to use him to tackle him tomorrow, take a shot at a couple more sonnets, and then we're going to keep moving on this week. We're going to talk about some pastoral poetry, which isn't in sonnet form, but very short still, and then eventually we're going to get to some Shakespearean sonnets. And that's where my English teacher pedigree comes in, because, man, let me tell you something, I love Shakespeare. Don't love everything English teachers are supposed to, but, man, I do love Shakespeare. I love his poetry. So anyway, hey, stay safe, stay warm. Tonight it's going to get into the 30s. I'm so pumped. I'm excited about that. I know most of you beach people aren't. I am thrilled about the concept of it being cold. I can't wait. Actually, this is my last video, and I'm going to go out and walk in it. So I'm excited about that. So, and hopefully this little chest pain thing will stop. And this isn't the last video I ever filmed, because I'm a little bit concerned, to be honest with you. So anyway, you guys have a great evening, a great night, and I will see you tomorrow. Let's hope, right?